I am sorry for any confusion I may have caught some people. About 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, my computer completely died with all my files and everything on it. And it took me a week to get it back, and it's taken me like today. I just finally was able to reinstall Word. Part of that's my fault, but and last week, Thanksgiving, the whole week was taken up with doing stuff with family and everything. Some of who I actually like. That was kind of fun. I realized what a weenie I've become living here. I raised my kids in northern Utah, and we still have a couple kids up there, and they came down with a couple of their kids. And Friday, I went over to my brother's who lives closer to the Red Rock LDS temple. And of course, my wife and I were bundled in our coats, and the kids that were from just south of Ogden, they had their sweatpants on and were wearing t-shirts. It really irritated me. See, it's funny to me that you live here for a couple of years in St. George, and rather quickly you get to the point where 75 degrees feels cold. But well, there are a couple of things I wanted to go over today. Um, I wanted to talk about the last set of things that are due, what the final is going to look like, and what it, then the process for doing the final. For people that have taken classes from me before, it is the same final that I usually give, and it's not a test where you talk about all the artwork we looked at. Rather, it's a personal reflection on the kinds of things that you learned and what you went through as a student taking the class. And then we're going to talk about this week's module of information. And if we have time, hopefully, I want to talk about uh, some of the projects that people have been doing. And I'm thinking that I mentioned that I wanted to do like an extra credit assignment for attendance, where you can, if you want the points, you can get them. And I'm thinking somebody suggested that what I do is just make a video where I walk through each of the things each of the AI assignments that have been turned in, and just kind of show off some of the projects that people have done, the final projects. And then if you watch that and tell me 5 things about it, you'll get extra credit, and you won't get anything dinged against you if you don't do it. Now, I did on this screen that I'm sharing, this is the last module. And so I'm probably not going to, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up for just a second. I'm probably not going to be talking about the AI assignments and all that kind of stuff specifically right now. I'm going to make that into a separate video that I will probably put online tomorrow. And then that could be, if you guys want to watch it, that's fine. Um, but I do want everybody to go through the discussion at least and look at the AI projects that people have been doing and the final projects that people have been doing. There's been some really good ones. Now, I did get an email today that um, Canvas will be usable it will be available for students to use and be open for use through next Friday, so through the 12th of December. And what that means from my perspective is, if you have any assignments that have yet to be turned in, go ahead and get them done and turned in. Also, anything that you did not get full and perfect points for, look at the notes that I made, ask me, email me for clarification or whatever, and then uh, make the changes you need to and resubmit, and get that all done by next Friday. And then that gives you an extra week to do a lot of stuff. And I realize this time of the semester is always stressful for many people. And hopefully that will, knowing that you have an extra week, that will help a bit. I wanted to show this final thing to you, talk about this, and then share with you what the final looks like. So here we have the final project guidelines. I think most everybody has turned in their proposal. Again, the proposals, a couple people were confused about that. This is not the project, and the proposal must be presented in order to get the 25 points. You need to show the email conversation back and forth. I have responded to everybody that has sent me the proposal and stuff. I haven't taken off any points for being late just because it's right over the holidays and stuff like that. If you have not done that yet, do it as soon as you possibly can. I think most everybody has done this. And then the final capstone project, you'll notice that I did extend the dates on that. But again, you also, if you need extra time, Canvas is open for you to submit things through to next Friday. And a lot of people are forgetting that there is that discussion component here, and all you got to do is just submit your project and you get full points for that. And it's primarily so that everybody else in the class can see what other people are doing. Right now, I do want to mention that weekly, the extra credit, the weekly reflection extra credit. And I'm going to click on this and show you what it looks like. We've talked about this before. If you want to do extra credit, it just has to be something that you experience that ties directly into this class, and then you talk about it using those 4 tools of artistic critique, just like you do a regular weekly reflection. You can submit it either as a written document or as a video, just like we've been talking about. Now, you can watch a movie, you can go to a museum, you can read a book, you can experience something outside of this class. It just has to be tied to this class. If, for example, you want to watch a movie like Gods of Egypt, which has a lot more to do with ancient art. However, if you want to tie it to this class, just talk about the computer graphics and animation that they use and how they make all the things look very real and what kind of processes they need to use to make the human look so much shorter than the divine beings in that movie. I don't know if anybody knows what Gods of Egypt is. And if you just mention something like that, that will tie it directly to this class, because even though it talks about a fantasy taking place in ancient Egypt, it still draws a lot from necessity of from the time period that we are doing in this class, which is 1350 to the present. If you go to a museum that is like the Getty Villa in Los Angeles, that has everything to do with the Greeks and Romans. It doesn't fit for this class. You go to the contemporary Getty, they have a lot of stuff in there that is ancient, but they also have a lot of stuff that's new. You can focus on the stuff that's new, and that will count for the extra credit. So if you have any questions about extra credit, talk to me. I've already had some people that were having some issues tying stuff to the class, and I helped them figure out what they needed to do so that it tied solidly to the subject matter of the class. All right, so that's the extra credit. Now I want to share with you the final. It says in-class final. It's going to be written. It's going to be something you submit on Sunday at midnight. So this coming Sunday, I'm going to change these dates so it actually reflects reality. On this Sunday at midnight, next Sunday at midnight, this will be open. Now for the final, there are 4 questions that need to be responded to as with essays, and they're 75-word essays. Now, I want to make it absolutely crystal clear for everybody. The word count does not apply to these copied words in the question. That does not count. You can copy those questions, the question out into a different document, write your answers after, but you only get points for the 75 words of answer for each of the 4 answers. I have to make that clear because I had somebody argue with me about it last year. It seems like nobody in this class has a problem with understanding that. I just have to make it clear. These questions do not challenge you on your information, on the information or knowledge of the stuff that we covered. These questions all relate to your experience as a student. So the first one is you write a response to what was your greatest challenge in this course? 2720. What was your greatest success in the course? What was the biggest surprise? And this could be, I say project or process, it could be an artist, it could be a movement, finding out that there were actually women Renaissance painters that were famous and women Renaissance architects, discovering uh, something about movements. What one of the defining brains behind the Dada movement was a collage artist from Germany. It could be any of those things, or if the greatest success was you learned a new way to look at abstract art that really surprised you. That that's fine. That's great. That works. Just write about that experience. And then the fourth one is what principle will you take from the course and use in your future career? I'm going to get rid of this part that says as an artist. It should be just as your future career. It doesn't matter what you do. There are things from this class that people have found help them in their future careers, from pouring cement to nursing and everything in between. Doesn't matter. But each of those four questions need to have an answer that's at least 75 words long. Now, why am I telling you all this, and why am I stressing that it goes online the first moment of finals during final week? It is because you have all finals week to work on it. However, if you do this early on and you don't do a good job on the things, maybe you're missing all the words that you need, your answers are too short, or they're just very unclear, that you sent me the first draft instead of the final draft. Any of those kinds of things, I will, as soon as I start seeing these come in, I will start grading them, and you can start resubmitting immediately. If there's an issue, I've had people do 3 out of the 4 questions and completely space the 4th question. I've had people do 60 words instead of 75-word answers. I've had people mix up the order that they answered and didn't answer the actual question that I asked. All of those things, if you are missing any points on the final, you can go through, see what I've graded, look at my notes, make the change that you need to, and resubmit. And that's why I have it open from the beginning of finals all the way through to the end. Now remember, Canvas shuts down, so you can't submit anything on midnight, Friday the 12th. And so I want everybody to understand you can go through and take this class, this test, this finals test at any point during finals week. Now, according to, or alongside of department mandate, if you elect not to do the final at all, you will lose an entire letter grade. So the final is important. And I also commit to you that every single day next week, I will be grading stuff. You'll see that everything right now is graded except for the final project. And I want to remind people that it is really, really important that you do everything you possibly can to get all those old assignments done, everything like that. Weekly reflections are really important. Get all those turned in. And if you are having any issues at all, there's some people in this class that have dealt with family issues, medical issues, job issues, whatever. Let me know and just get the stuff done and get it turned in. So again, you have until next Friday, and that is the 12th of December. All right, so let's go on with the class. This week, and again, I've got to apologize to people. My computer completely died. All my files were on it, and I've spent the last couple of weeks. It was fixed, and I've been finding whatever files that I could, revamping stuff, taking care of everything. This morning is when I finally was able to reinstall Word on my computer, and that was exciting. So I do apologize for being out of that, and I'm very glad that so many people did such a great job with like postmodernism. Talking about that, going through the modules and everything like that. I really appreciate what people have been doing. Very thoughtful reflections. Uh, a lot of the times, I do find that sometimes if you're missing points on a reflection, the biggest problem is you're sending the wrong assignment. You submitted the wrong assignment. The other big problem is that it doesn't deal directly with that week's module. And if I've taught this for years now, if I say something like this doesn't deal with this module, but you're working with something specific that you found in the module, all you've got to do is resubmit it with a note at the top saying, "Yeah, this was in the first section of this module," and it's one of the videos that you had us look at. It was in there. All you got to do is tell me that, and then that's fine. If that's the case, sometimes people have been sending the wrong reflections in. Um, Instead of sending the assignments into the right category. Anyway, what we are talking about, we have talked about art from Renaissance up until today. And remember, contemporary art is art that is basically built within the lifespan of the viewer. And I think more than that, it is specifically tied to elements of reality that are within the lifespan of the viewer. And roughly speaking, and I'm just going to say, all this kind of stuff is just roughly speaking. We are talking right now from 1980 to the present. And a big part of that is that connotes contemporary art as separate from other art done in that time period, is that contemporary art seems to be specifically tied to the technologies and cultural concerns of that time period as well. Uh, there are always going to be exceptions, and what I've given you is a general rule of thumb. There are artists that are figurative artists that are doing stuff in Renaissance style, or they're doing stuff in regionalist style, the 1920s, 1930s, or they are doing stuff in Name style from ancient India, but they are working today as artists. I wouldn't, if they are using the materials and processes that are consistent with those historical art techniques, I wouldn't categorize them as contemporary artists unless they are showing things that only exist now. For example, using Baroque era painting techniques to do portraits of people eating at McDonald's. That would be something that would be specifically contemporary because McDonald's didn't exist previously. McDonald's has been around, for quite a while, but I hope you get the kind of idea. Another thing would be using AI, like we did in that assignment, using AI to create a scene in the style of a Renaissance master, but with some people wearing contemporary clothes. That is a very clear indication of contemporary art because people are wearing clothes that are of today. They're blending styles, but they're using a tool that really wasn't invented until the lifespan of the viewer. AI imagery that's any good hasn't been around for very long at all. So I hope that kind of gives an idea of what the contemporary focus is. And what I've talked about in this is using contemporary art to explore identity, narratives of identity, questions that are important to the people that are alive today. And I'm going at this at a little bit of a different way than I think most people expect. I'll talk about memory and history, are they the same thing? Well, absolutely not. History is generally going to be documentations, and memory is going to be the stuff that's between our ears, how we choose to store away events. There is going to be a lot of overlap, but there is also going to be many examples where the two conflict with each other. For example, who writes the history? Is it the reason why we live on the North America, the North American continent, is not because Americus was the Americus Vespucci or whatever his name was, not because he was the first person to publish a map or to make a map of the Americas, but because he was the first one to get uh, widely published. And before the people that had made maps before him got the word out substantially, he was already giving documents to people with his name on it. And that's why our continents are called the Americas. The reason why I'm mentioning that is memory and history are not always the same thing. We may remember events in a very specific sequence, and that may very well be the sequence that they happened. But where history comes in is what is documented. For example, I worked with a gentleman who he and his brother swam across Utah Lake, and they were the first teenagers to do that as far as anybody knew, in the 20th century. I don't know how accurate that statement is, but that's what they believed. I think it was more they were the first ones in their family to do it, because a lot of people have swam across Utah Lake. But it was newsworthy at the time because they were these two teenagers from Springville High who swam across in the early 60s. This guy was doing a book about 15, 20 years ago of history from Utah County. And he interviewed this guy that I know. I know the story. I know that he and his brother covered themselves with Vaseline so they could stay warm. His dad was the spotting boat, or rowed the spotting boat, and he just kept track of them as he slowly rowed across the river or Utah Lake. And when they got out on the other side, they were covered with green algae, and they looked like. And I knew this guy's dad as well. His dad said when they came out on the shore, they looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon, all covered with green algae and everything. So I knew all this stuff. But when the book was published that this historian had written, after interviewing the guy, the story was completely different. In that case, it was a person I knew was swimming. His brother was in the boat. His dad was eating lunch. It was a completely different account. But what is now recognized as history is what was documented. History isn't a static thing. It constantly changes. And our memories change too. Our memories change as we evolve, our memories evolve. And as more documentation comes to light, as people are able to discover what the context of language used is, and as they are able to validate some records and invalidate others, history changes. Now, why is all that important, that relationship between memory and history? Why is that important? When we're dealing with contemporary art, things like this, questions about what is real, what isn't real, the importance of validating people's personal experiences, and finding out what is verified, those kinds of questions become really important. An example of this is you guys probably don't know about the Connecticut witch trials. It's happened in the 1600s, same time that everybody knew, what was going on with Salem. Same thing was happening in Connecticut. But the people involved in Connecticut were so embarrassed that they burned all the official documentation when the furor died down. The only reason it came out is that about 10, 15 years ago, people started digitizing in Connecticut journals of people who wrote down what happened to them in the 17th century. And that's when they discovered. Now, since then, Connecticut has officially pardoned all the people involved that were accused of witchcraft. And the state itself has acknowledged what happened and everything. But it's really interesting to me that that is a part of actual events, but it was not part of history. And it became part of history because of the documentation of people's memories. All those things are tied together in that one little bit. I wanted to mention, I don't know if you guys have heard about the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect, I want you to read these articles. I have a couple articles, and then most of these are videos, but I want you to read about them. Two of the big things is that when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, there were thousands of people that were shocked because they thought that he had died in prison, and they had very solid memories of Nelson Mandela dying in prison. Another common one is people remembering a cornucopia on the Fruit of the Loom tag, which the people that manufacture Fruit of the Loom clothing products claim was never part of their logo. That was sewed into their underwear banding. But people remember that. Or names of peanut butter, names of children's shows, characters on children's shows. A lot of things become something that people remember very solidly, and even to the point of tying some of their identity to it, and then in the historical record disagrees with them. But definitely watch. This is a short video with the man William Shatner. If any of you don't know who William Shatner is, um, don't tell me on the final, because you will fail this class. No, I'm just kidding. William Shatner was a Shakespearean actor. He played Captain Kirk in the Star Trek series, as well as several other roles. He invented uh, uh, genres of music like hallucinogenic rock and roll, as well as spoken word poetry performance. Henry Rollins of Black Flag credits William Shatner with being a principal force behind what later developed into punk rock or hardcore punk, which is separate from punk rock. But he did a video where he talks about this. That's kind of cool. But definitely check all this out. Again, why is all this important? We live in a world that is so thoroughly interconnected, even now, that it becomes a challenge to learn what reality is. And I'm going to make a claim that I hope people don't fight me on, because I think it is pretty consistent. However, if you disagree with it, that's fine too. Reality comes down to I think there are two kinds of reality. There is a kind of reality that is shared and that can be quantified, that can be measured, that can be documented with photography and things like that. But there is something else, very personal reality, that comes down to essentially our um, remembrances of our experiences. And that is every bit as real. I mentioned before that I'm a folklorist. I do a lot with different things like ghosts and cryptids and stuff like that, because I'm really interested in how those kinds of subject matters impact the people that experience those things. And it's frustrating to me when I hear somebody who claims to be a researcher that completely discounts people's personal experiences. When, if, for example, you have anybody in your family who believes that they have experienced a ghost presence, what a lot of researchers fail to understand is that regardless of whether or not ghosts are quantifiable, or whether or not Bigfoot is quantifiable, whether or not any of these kinds of cryptid or supernatural things are quantifiable and can be independently verified, the people that experience these weird events, their bodies go through all the markers of experience with quantifiable events. Their bodies will, heart rates will peak. Um, uh, reactions, emergency stress reactions will happen at their bodies. Their brains will undergo all the challenges and changes that people go through when they're having quote unquote real experiences. And so, from a very real perspective, regardless of what the event is, the individual who experiences it, it is real to them. And I think that if we can appreciate that, that goes a long way in appreciating exploration of contemporary art. And I do talk a lot about in this, I talk about contemporary artists that are working on those ideas of memory and history. What are they doing? What types of things do they do? This is Sharon Neshat is somebody that I really appreciate. I lived in Persia for a short while, and it is one of those countries where the human beings are very different than the governmental expression. And I'll leave it like that. Shirin Nishat is from Persia, and she does these powerful photos where she will write poetry, and she will write it in Persian on a model or on the photo of a model. She will make portraits of really powerful women, strong women, and she addresses all sorts of ideas about not just what is on the historical record in the Middle East, but making it very personal. How are these individuals who live through the events impacted? And I've done a similar thing. Each of these artists that are dealing with those kinds of things, they are dealing with what is that experience that is very real to the individual that went through it, and how does that compare with official history, official accounts? Just like what is the actual experience that an individual goes through when they witness a ghost, for example, compared to whether or not ghosts exists. What is the actual history? I think that is that's fascinating. One of the things that makes the Cubist movement so important is that, and this was 120 years ago, is that was one of the first times that professional artists showing in galleries that became internationally recognized were really exploring the ideas that your perception as a viewer is just as vital to the life of the art as the artist creating it or the people that commission it. And your experience as a viewer is important, as well as that idea that everybody else's experience is also important. Multiple perspectives, even of different things, even that are in disagreement, every multiple perspective, every different perspective can be equally valid and equally important. And I think that goes a long way in helping us to understand this kind of contemporary art. Another one of my favorites is Kara Walker. She is not. I will warn you, when you see her work, it is not easy stuff to look at. Kara Walker is a Black American who is very powerful in helping people to address the heart-wrenching personal realities of elements of American history. Not just the big events that everybody remembers, but how individuals were impacted by some of the fallout of some of those big events. And she can be difficult to watch. Brilliant individual. Another one of these interesting dichotomies or areas that people work with where when they work on contemporary art is manipulation and marginalization. And why is that important? Well, I think we can agree that today we're very aware that there are a significant number of people that have a voice today, that have opportunities to talk about things that are important to them today that 10, 15 years ago would have been discounted completely, um, or completely ignored because politically it wasn't appropriate. And I think, there are cultural justifications for these. uh, these kinds of things that for some people feel might be really appropriate, for others might not feel really appropriate. One of the things I'm thinking about is I don't know if you guys know much about the Kurds and Turkey. The Kurdish people is a loosely knit community spanning a significant portion of Transoxiana, with a lot of their population, a lot of their vocal population, living in present day Turkey. When Ataturk wrested control of the government out of the remnants of the Ottomans, and this is like World War One, right around there, a little bit before then. One of the groups that he did not find easy to control were the Kurds. They were fiercely independent. Many of them spoke Turkish, but more of them spoke not only Kurd, but their own regional dialects of Kurd. And since they were nomadic and since they did not have long lasting roots in specific communities, because they were nomadic and they moved around, um, Ataturk's government found that it was easier just to start getting rid of them. So he rounded up thousands of men, women, and children, put them on trains, and just took the trains out and stopped them in the middle of tracks, out in the middle of literally nowhere. And thousands of these men and women and children died from exposure and hypothermia. That is something that is going to be very difficult for you to find out about in history books, because in the world scheme of things and how people judge this kind of stuff in history books, it seemed relatively unimportant. It was vitally important to the Kurds and the people who lost family members. Now, why is that important? They are treated in Turkey in a similar way as many cultural subsets in the Americas are treated. Where they're sidelines, they're marginalized, they're given the crappy jobs that nobody else wants, and they're blamed for society's problems. More recently, people who identify as Kurds, the survivors of this uh, genocide that the Ataturk government was propagating, they've been finding more and more of a voice. And now, today, there are Kurdish rappers, there are Kurdish musicians, there are Kurdish um, uh, filmmakers and painters and sculptors. And what's interesting is that these folks are trained in traditional artworks that are both traditional to Turkish and to Turkey and the West, and they will use those tools as contemporary artists to deal with those questions that others have about who they are, and also to assert their own right to develop identity and to settle their own identity. And I think that is fascinating, and that is something where 30 years ago, 40 years ago, uh, Kurdish artist in Turkey is going to be the best that they could hope to do would be as a busker, on the streets, and that's probably about it. And now, because of the tools available, and not just the tools for artistic creation, but the tools of um, communication and dissemination of artwork, they can have an impact in the communities and countries from Northeast Africa all the way into Southern China from the work that they do. And people not only are hearing them expressing themselves, but they are also validating their own right to exist as in a way that they define as themselves. And I think that is really, really interesting. So people, contemporary artists, dealing with these issues of manipulation and marginalization. Like, why would I have Jean-Claude Van Damme here? Well, I don't know if any of you guys heard about Tartarian civilization. I love, sometimes when it's hard for me to sleep, I will go on and find a rabbit hole to dive into on YouTube. And YouTube is another one of these tools that is, yeah, there's 99% of everything you find is garbage. But I think it was Prince who said, as the costs of production go down, so does the quality. But as the costs go down, so does uh, the reach for opportunity. More people are able to try. So even though generally the quality may go down, you get an awful lot greater volume of people that are trying. And so you can find a lot of hidden gems. Tartarian civilization is one of these rabbit holes. Uh, I click at that link and it will take you to it. But this idea that there was an advanced civilization that disappeared right around 150 to 120 years ago. And this advanced civilization uh, lived alongside the civilization that we feel we have grown out of um, during this whole time. But internationally, before uh, we get any sort of this mass transition of information electronically, well before that, all the records, not only was the Tartarian civilization destroyed by the rest of the world, but all their records were destroyed as much as possible too. And this rabbit hole talks about how it would be possible for people with 1890s technology to erase a civilization contemporary to them. And that's one of the reasons why I have Jean-Claude Van Damme here. His Time Cop movie is a great example of uh, self um, self-reflective uh, cultural expose. Done in the 1990s, I believe it was, uh, using as an excuse to be self-reflective the idea of time travel. What kinds of things could you erase out of the time continuum if you could? What types of things would you erase if you could? What would you change if you could? And it's just a fun movie, but it is also a really interesting commentary on how the world viewed itself at the time. But both of those things are about the ideas of changing history. And although, yeah, we can laugh about that, um, it is something that is really important right now to be considering as we talk about contemporary art. Is even though we have the power to erase history, we also have the power to assert our own voice and find documentation of history that uh, feels more appropriate, more fair, more realistic. Uh, when I was growing up as a young person, um, I was raised with this idea, and I'm really sorry if this is offensive or it dates, but it will definitely date me. In the 1970s, I was taught that the Native American was, on one hand, the noble savage, but also the wild man that couldn't be trusted. And a big part of that was because of the entertainment that was so wildly popular at the time, as well as what was actually taught in schools. Now, fortunately, my parents we opened our home, and I was also raised alongside three Dene brothers and a Shoshone sister. And so my experience was rather different than that of many of my contemporaries in, second, third, and fourth grade, things like that. For example, the movies that we watched were ones that um, if they showed Native Americans in a bad light, my brothers and sister would say, "Well, this is the real story," or they would encourage me to watch the shows that uh, showed them in a good light. It just and it was interesting because it was very different. Like when people would play cowboys and Indians, the cowboys were almost all automatically the good guys, and the Indians were all automatically the bad guys. Except when I played with my brothers and sister, it was more people that were on either the same playing field, or the cowboys would be the bad guys. And what I'm saying is that what's really interesting is with the lower cost of production value, or not, I'm sorry, not the lower cost of production, more people have access to express themselves. and more people gain confidence to express themselves. More people have access to technology and education to express themselves, to educate themselves, and than ever before. And so we will get points of view that are directly counter to ones that are held as unquestioned for ages on one hand, but also we will get new voices, voices that have never been heard before, voices who are able to speak with confidence because they have the tools that the confident voices that preceded them have always been able to use. And I think that that is really fascinating to me. Some examples is I work with um, the Aga Khan and Ismaili Muslims, and this is a group of a subset of Muslims that have been kicked out of many different countries. Most recently, in the 70s, Idi Amin kicked them out of the areas he controlled in Africa, and millions of them fled to Canada. What is exciting to me is they consistently will go around the world and help people uh, reclaim personal identity, find who they are. Um, in the post-colonial world, uh, a lot of people have a tendency to get angry and towards people that they view represent the folks who had colonized them previously. And what the Aga Khan supports is self-reflective education, where people realize that there's no reason to be angry, and that you have the permission to speak for yourself and share with others your perspective. You can always uh, get greater benefit communicating who you are when you don't approach any situations initially as being angry. And the reason why I like that is because it creates an environment where contemporary artists can produce beautiful work that invites an opportunity for you to consider things, and it helps them to it provides an opportunity for them to express themselves in a way that is not hidden by anger, but in a way that allows us to listen to each other. And I think that that kind of approach is absolutely beautiful. Now, William Kentridge is he is a South African artist who uses everything from sculpture to animation. And I know that you've seen some of his work, but he deals with these questions of um, racism and generational anger, but he also deals with issues of opportunity and building futures. And he does it in a way, he's not preaching to anybody. He will do animations about, what is a typical day in a person's life like, or, what can we relate to? What are the things that we can relate to with somebody that looks very different from us or sounds very different from us? But he also does things that demonstrate, look, all these people are just human beings as well. I'm a human being. And it's very interesting way of fabricating a new reality that deals with very many times very painful things, but it's done in such a way where the future feels like it would be valuable to get to. And I love that kind of work. Ai Weiwei is one of my favorite artists as well. I want to share this with you. He is very much a contemporary artist, and he will work with teams of people to do things under his direction. Like, for example, this is one of his famous works right here. He's basically filled the floors of buildings with millions of ceramic sunflower seeds. And he will have teams of people that are creating these. But he's doing them for a couple reasons. One is, if this is just sunflower seeds, who'd care? But the fact that he was able to coordinate the efforts of hundreds of people to make millions of ceramic sunflower seeds, all of them are unique, all of them are handmade, that's a testament to people working together as well. And I think that's just amazing. So this is this, yeah, oddly enough, the title of the piece is Sunflower Seeds. But he will do things that sometimes are very, very painful to look at. One of his installations, the portions of the Chinese government underwrote a number of schools to be built without proper um, safeguards, without proper standards for construction. And in some earthquakes, the parents of the children had to wait over a week to find out that the reason their children weren't calling them back is because they had died when the school collapsed on them. And so a couple of Ai Weiwei's works will deal with this idea of evidence of children who had died because of governmental irresponsibility. And he's not railing against the government. He is asking people to consider, what are the results of giving all your power to somebody else who doesn't know who your family is. And one of his big concerns is people losing track of their past, of their memories and their history together. He was able to get enough money raised to buy a couple Han Dynasty urns, and these are 2,000-year-old urns, and he filmed himself breaking them. And this was a piece of artwork. It was a series of stills. There was also a film. There was also different things like that, but it's specifically designed to be conceptual and make you think about who is responsible for protecting history. Why is historical stuff important? Why should we care? And he's not telling you what to think, but he's providing an atmosphere to start thinking about it. And he does monumental works. But what is really interesting too to me is he will reconstruct historical things from China's history with contemporary structures. But he will also identify with different groups of people that symbolize to him marginalized groups within China itself. One of the things that he does is he raises a lot of money to help people fleeing war torn communities in Africa, people going across the Mediterranean to find better hope and better futures in Europe and other places in the world. He helps a lot of political refugees, thousands every year. So he's not just a person that makes stuff for you to think about, but he's an artist who creates beautiful things, and he's an artist who's an activist that helps save people's lives in the real world. And this it's difficult to say too much good about somebody like this. And the remembering is one of the ones that he did to help people remember the children that died in Chinese earthquakes that government later lied about. And this room right here, it's about 40 feet across right here, and it's about 80 feet long, and it's covered with an inch thick layer of these handmade ceramic sunflower seeds. And you can pass it right by, you can completely ignore it, or you can realize, well, wait a sec, this is something that can be done when people are united in a common goal. And it's not designed to be earth shattering, it is designed entirely to be reflective as a symbol of what people can do. And I think stuff like that, I think, is just absolutely amazing. And then he'll do stuff like this that is just amazing. Everybody talks about all the bicycles all around in China and everything like this. Here, he got a whole bunch of bicycles together and then welded them into this fantastic futuristic sculpture. And just a lot of his stuff, I think, is really interesting. Or displaying people that hoard displaying their hoards, the stuff that they collect. But take time to definitely look at what Ai Weiwei does. He is one of these amazing contemporary artists that I think is really powerfully decent. And then I love Walid Rud. I'm sorry, I can't. Walid Rud. Yeah. What he does is I think it's really fascinating. He'll make these sculptural uh, installations where he will take these hollow crates that are designed to look like museum shipping crates, and then he will cut out shapes of sometimes the actual realistic things, sometimes fantastical things that could have been inside of these crates, so that when you see them, you see a wall of boxes that are empty, but you see this fantastical shapes in there, and it starts making you think about possibilities and fantasy and other people's thoughts about the world. And I think it's really amazing just the seeing children interact with this when they realize that the thing is not there, it's just a cutout. And then hearing their conversations about what could this be? What does this represent? Well, was it ever inside the box? Could it be inside the box still? Is there another box that has it inside it? Or is it free somewhere else? And it's just fascinating to see how people interact with his work. And Yinka Shonobara is another one of my very favorite artists. This is an individual who he doesn't have the full use of his body. I believe he's in a wheelchair, and he considers himself a dual citizen of England and Nigeria. And one thing that he could easily do is become an angry black artist with a cause and fit into just a lot of people's preordained stereotypes. What Yinka Shonobara does instead is he works with um, particularly Enlightenment era and romantic and realism movements in the 19th century. He deals with figures and ideas and uh, settings of sculptural and painting from the sculptures and painting from that span. And he uses fabrics that friends of him has designed who live currently in Nigeria and Mali and different areas. And he creates these sculptures that look like they could be uh, even sometimes what Norman Rockwell might have done. And he dresses them in fabrics that are very contemporary, but he designs the figures so that, yeah, this is a globe, and you don't see anybody's flesh on the hands or feet or anything like that, but it's designed specifically so that you respond to what looks like a little kid sitting on a chair. And this could be any kid, anybody. And I love it because he invites you to participate in a world where everyone starts becoming important. Everyone can participate. Everyone's included. And it's a world of exploration and fun. And sometimes he'd like Carol Walker, he will deal with really um, angry and painful concepts. But for the most part, but even when he does that, he does it in such a way that you want to share space with the thoughts that he has. He's not condemning you. He's not telling you you're bad or evil or anybody's bad or evil. He just wants you to think about, what does being a member of humanity mean for everybody involved? And how can we benefit from each other's life experiences? And so I really love this stuff that he does. I think it's just amazing. Yinka Shonobara, absolutely amazing person. So these are just some of the artists that I wanted to talk about, and uh, for contemporary art. Again, talking contemporary art stuff that, on one hand, probably couldn't exist before the lifespan of the people that are currently viewing it, and we're talking about technology and materials, access to dissemination, those kinds of things, as well as just stuff that is produced in the lifespan of the individual. But I think most importantly, contemporary art has to do with what is the pertinence to the lifespan as a viewer. And I hope that this has kind of introduced you to a way of looking at this. Um, I have experienced what is really sad. I have experienced many people that claim to be contemporary artists that do stuff that is just a waste of time. Uh, when it's obvious that the individual can't even talk about their own work, they can't articulate their own thoughts, they can't express any sort of an idea of the motivations that drove them to do what they're doing. I think that that is an indication of either the person needs to really work on their articulation, or more often than not, it's because the person's doing stuff because it's cool and they're trying to make it sound like more than what it is. So the four tools of artistic critique: describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate, are really important when you look at modern, postmodern, and very much contemporary art. I Because when you look at it, I want you to be able to kind of define what it is that you're examining. Is it an animation? Is it something that begins and ends in a specific time frame, or is it something that's more nebulous? I want you to be able to articulate a bit, how was it created? What was the process behind its genesis? If it's contemporary, what are the technologies that this person is making specific use of that only exist today and couldn't exist 50 years ago or 100 years ago? Or are they dealing with concepts that we're only becoming aware of today? An example of that is, um, I don't know if you've seen the Priceline commercials where people are floating on these pink clouds. There was a Japanese woman, of course, because I want to talk about her, I can't remember her name, Mariko Mori. And I'll show you some of her work. Her work, Pure Land, was done as computer animation started becoming available. So she did this. She is a contemporary artist. So this was done in the late 90s. But what she was doing, using cute cartoon characters, but also this comes directly out of Japanese uh, spiritual traditions. It deals with the Kame and Buddhism altogether. And what's interesting to me is that Mariko Mori, in doing this, was using technology that was only contemporary to that time. It didn't exist before she started working on it. And she is doing something about people's, that is reflection on people reconnecting with their contemporary cultural landscape. And then this now has come back to influence the design of commercials like the Priceline, Kelly Cuoco, talking about going to Japan. And the person she's talking to in the ad, is fantasizing about Japan in an environment floating in pink clouds. And stuff like that, I think is awesome. And so, ask yourself, how did the person make it? And then ask yourself, what are the connections that the person is making? What are they expressing themselves? Do they identify as being part of a marginalized population, or are they connecting with a group of people? Or is it just connecting with a group of people that share a similar experience of worldview? Or are they just expressing themselves as an individual? All those things are important questions to ask. and finally evaluate, is it worthwhile? Is this a shot in the dark one time thing? Or is this something like what Banksy does, where consistently he will find things that a lot of people are concerned about or upset about or angry about, and he'll address those directly in his graffiti and street art? Because he does both. Some of the stuff is legal, some of it isn't. And there are times when even a famous artist will do stuff that I think they were just they had nothing better to do, and they thought, yeah, I'll waste 5 minutes and throw this together. But many times you go through those steps, I think that will help us to weed out the people that are doing stuff to show up on your Instagram feed, as opposed to the artists that are really good people to keep your eye out for, because they're individuals and as artists you might want to have intellectual conversations with. And that is something that I think is really important about all the stuff that we looked at. The artwork that we see and that we've seen through this class is there's a lot of famous pieces that we've looked at, a lot of really interesting stuff, many things that are specifically identifiable as elements of the culture that produced them. They help to define their their culture. But I think one of the more important things to look at is, from all the architecture and everything else that we've seen, is these also provide opportunities that can be seen as excuses to kind of have a conversation with that culture that produced it, or maybe the people that produced it. And by this, I'm not saying, hold an image in your head and pretend to talk to them. But I went to a really beautiful cathedral in Paris. It's called Saint Chapelle. And going through it, I could see areas of stone that were worn by people that had walked the same path for hundreds of years. I could see areas of wood that I could still see some of the early tool marks on it when the piece of wood was put together and put into the church. And I could also see how the wood had aged with generations of smoke and oil from people's hands as they had rested their hands on it and walked by. The metalwork in the stained glass, you'd see evidence of human beings working on it. Now, I know that there's most likely their spirits are not there waiting and lining up to talk to me, but I could start thinking to myself, this is put together at the tail end of the guild system, and people's whole livelihoods were involved in building this. It was important not just as the faith that it represented, but it also was important as something that unified families economically and culturally. Everybody was working together on a common goal to create something intended to last decades and centuries. Why does this piece of wood look the certain way that it did? Well, maybe because the person making it only had access to these kinds of tools, or they had to use wood that was this shape to begin with and had to get it to do a job that it wasn't designed to do. Those kinds of questions are really interesting to have, because I think that helps us to connect with the very human element that was necessary to the production of those things. Um, Art doesn't necessarily have to be pretty to be valuable. It doesn't have to even look nice. The fact that somebody made it and they made it with intention gives it a certain weight that requires at least enough respect for us to look at it long enough to evaluate whether or not it has worth, according to our own worldview. Even if you don't like something, at the very least, you can appreciate the fact that somebody felt strongly enough that it was important to them to make it in the first place. And even though we're not imagining avatars and holding pretend conversations with people, I think we can look at stuff closely enough to recognize that there it can be a very human connection between us and whoever made that thing. And maybe that thing itself can give us a little bit of insight, somebody that we never met, never even heard of, but can still value this ghost of their presence. And I think that's valuable to take away. Anyway, after all that, uh, we are at the end of the semester, and I wanted to thank you very much for being part of the class with me. Uh, I had not intended to do that. Sorry. Um, I appreciate going through and sharing this kind of stuff with people. And hopefully, you walk away from this class realizing that there are a lot of connections to be made, that art is very rarely constructed in a complete vacuum, and it almost always demonstrates, if you know what to look for and you pay attention and you listen close enough, it almost always demonstrates um, a very strong contextual connection with the culture that created it. And we can gain insights with people that are very different from us from the stuff that they produce. I hope you also walk away with the perspective that we live within a very tiny temporal bubble that is only as big as our own experiences. And when we encounter stuff that's outside of that experience, it gives us an opportunity to perhaps expand our awareness, our appreciation, or respect to include people that don't have the same worldview as we do, the people that view things differently, may view things very, very differently from us. And that doesn't always mean that we have to despise them. Hopefully, that does mean that we can take the time to at least appreciate that they lived within the environment they were born into. You know, even if that is very different from ours. So, just something to think about. I am going to put together, and I know I mentioned this a while ago, but one of the things I'm going to do is put together a video where I talk about the AI things that people have submitted and the excuse me, excuse me, as well as the projects that people are turning in. And I'll put that video out in the next day or two, and it will be something that you can watch and get extra credit for watching. You don't have to do it. It's not going to be an assignment. You can just watch it if you're able to. But I want people to go through the discussions in the class. And let's see if we can get to that. I'll show you where this is. If you go all the way down your Canvas thing, right towards the bottom, right here, AI Advanced Discovery Projects, right here is where people have turned in their AI stuff. And I want you to look at that, the things that people have turned in and explore that. This will be part of the video that I make. And then on top of that as well, I also want to share with you the projects that people are doing. And I'll just talk about them briefly. And I don't think the video will be very long. Like right here, several people have turned in their projects, but I want people to see what other folks in the class are doing. And like I said, I'll get that out to you in the next day or two. And you will not be dinged if you don't do it. And if you do it, you'll get extra credit for attendance. So, and I also want to remind people, we talked about the final today. The final will go out and be open for people to start working on the first day of finals. And it will be open for the entire week. And I suggest very strongly that you start working at it on the first day. And every day I will go through and grade whatever entries I get. And if you need to make a change or resubmit, you'll have plenty of time to do that if you turn it in right at the beginning. If you turn it in like at 10 o'clock Friday night, next Friday, the last day of finals, and I'll grade it as soon as I can, but if you're missing points, you probably won't have an opportunity to resubmit. If you and again, I want to remind people too that Canvas will shut down next Friday at midnight, so you won't be able to submit any of your old stuff. but I want you right as soon as you possibly can, submit everything you possibly can. If you submit, as we go to assignments, the weekly reflections that people turn in all of these that you've been missing, because this is a significant portion of your grade, 30% of your grade. And this can really help you. Go if you're missing half of these, go back and redo them and get those done. And then the projects, a lot of people are forgetting to submit the discussion after they submit the project. Submit the discussion. It's only a couple points, it's only 5 points, but if you miss all of those, that is a pretty significant chunk. And then we have the final project. Notice that I did change the due date. So the final project is due this Friday. And you really need to remember to get the project proposal turned in, which is us emailing back and forth. So make sure you do that until I get to the point where I say, yes, go for it. I've had several people forget about that part and that they just send the proposal to me. So no, the assignment to get the points is you need to submit a screenshot of our email conversation back and forth. And that's very important. So please, if you have any questions about stuff to turn in or anything like that, uh, email me just as soon as you possibly can. And I look forward to seeing what people are producing in their projects and the other things that they're doing as we wind up in the rest of the semester. Thank you so much for being with me this whole semester, and I hope that we meet again in another class. And I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. So I look forward to hearing from you guys over the next week and a half and seeing the responses to your final questions when that goes online. So thank you very much, and I will talk to you guys later on.